learn a little bit about our 70 years of history, and I'll turn it over to Nancy and Mary Kay to kind of give their own introductions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Janice. I'm Nancy, and this is Mary Kay. Sometimes we're a team. We go way back. My first position on Executive Council, Mary Kay was the Program Vice President, and I was at SPM, so that was our first connection. And so I'm happy that she joined today to help share a little bit of what it was like during her role in, which was Jaycee Women at that time. So.
And you were state president.
Right.
For those who don't know.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry. I was state president 82, 83, and I love it when I go to things and you say that date. I hate saying it because someone always says,
I wasn't even born.
I wasn't even born yet, and I'm like, oh, please don't tell me, you know. So, but 82, 83, and served several positions then after that, and then I went on to serve as executive director when we became Women of Today. So that was kind of my background in the organization.
And I was president in 80, 81. I made it just a couple of years before, and went on to be. Well, it's like, I don't even remember what it was called, for like personal enrichment on the national level. And I got to train and travel around the nation. That was really one of my favorite jobs. It was really a fun job.
That's like living and learning is today.
Oh yeah, living personal enrichment.
Yeah.
What is that? What it is on the national level now? I don't even know.
It's personal development stuff on the national.
Okay, I thought that. I can't remember what it was called. That was fun.
I'm going to.
And Nancy really did this. I'm just popping in, you know. She really did all this show, and I'm just adding in. So just so you know.
The Nancy and Mary Kay show.
Huh?
Nancy and Mary Kay show.
Well, it's really the Nancy show that I'm just counting.
So it is a big year for us, coming up on 70 years in January. It's a big time to celebrate because that's a long time for an organization to continue through different obstacles and challenges and to still keep going strong. So I'm going to share a little bit with you of what that was like and hopefully get more to where we made some real big changes and things like that. But first of all, who is Lois? And would she approve of what we are today? We'll figure that out at the end of the presentation. But Lois was the very first president of the Minnesota Mrs. Jaycees. Lois Christensen was her name. She was from Winona, Minnesota. And at that time, the Jaycees, which was considered and still is considered a young men's training organization, Junior Chamber of Commerce. And they were always, of course, pulling their wives in to do everything for them. And Lois said, hey, what about us? Why can't we do, you know, what you're doing? And so she worked with some of the Jaycee state presidents and got permission. In those days, you needed permission. And to get a women's group started. There were many women's auxiliaries made up of wives, but they weren't organized as a state organization. So they would just work with their local chapters. So Lois is the one who really got the ball going. They were hosting a national convention, and of course, a lot of it was falling on their shoulders. And so she talked to the president at that convention and asked him, and he was all for it. And so the following May, the Jaycees voted to form the auxiliary, which was the Mrs. Jaycees of Minnesota. And then they went on to the national organization and presented that idea, and some of the states then started the auxiliaries a little bit more. So in 1950 was when she started, and one of the first things they thought, we need a creed. She thought we should have a creed. And ironically, that creed is still the creed we say today. And to me, that is one of the, it just sometimes gives me the chills when I think of that fact. The Virginia Mrs. Jaycees, chapters could submit, and they submitted the creed that we say today. So that is, we thank them for that. They're clever, thoughtful, and I think it still says, you know, what we do today. So that is one of the first things that they started. One of the next things they started was, believe it or not, a newslet. And this is the very first newslet done in 1950. Lois thought we needed some way to get information out. Of course, no computers. There was not even a thought of a computer in those days. So she got going the stationery for, or not even, she did stationery too, but this was for the newslet. This is to inform the chapters. And then, of course, it went on to a different format. This one, I think, is 1969 was this one. And then, of course, the present-day newslet. So that's still part of what we have today. And that's a little bit of what I wanted to share with you, is how so many things that these women started back in the 50s and the 60s are really still part of our organization today. It's amazing when you start looking, back on that. So a couple of those things. One of them is the plan of action. The plan of action, and it used to always be printed with a red cover, so you always knew what the plan of action looked like. And then we switched to using the president's theme for the cover. So it's the same type of thing. This is the only picture I had. I am not real sure on when they started, but this is the one from 1967. So that's one of the things they started. Another thing is what we called in those days the Lady Mile Award. And we used to have trophies. So when you won Lady Mile, which now we call Chapter Mile at a convention, you had to lug home this trophy. It was an honor, but still, it was cumbersome. But it was engraved, so all of the names of the chapters that had won were placed on that. And I think we took those plates off and saved the plates when we got rid of the trophies. But, and I was guessing on this one. So Jane, was this Chapter Mile? Say yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we do that again. Same type of award is one of the things we still continue. Our programming, and I want to talk about those words, service, growth, and fellowship, because those are in the creed. And they still are words we use today. And to show you a little bit of how we still do that service, the growth, and the fellowship. The service is probably the one thing that stands out for all of us as one. A lot of times it's the main reason people join, and then they learn and get the other things as a side benefit, but that's kind of what draws them. So our very first programming area that we had was called Toys and Joys, and this was started in 1953. They always said that their first project really was membership and extensions, which makes sense when you start with 8 chapters and then you build from that. So in 53, they started Toys and Joys, which was a program to take toys for children in hospitals. In those days, there were a lot more children's hospitals, different facilities, and so that was to give and donate to that. And really, this programming area has continued really and morphed into what we now call Youth of Today. So in 1964, they called it Child Protection Program. One of the things they did was doing ID bracelets. And some of you might remember those, some of you might know. I remember getting them for my kids where they had, now you probably wouldn't want to send your children out with a tape with all their information, but in those days we did. So that was through the Child Protection Program. Then when they went to delinquent youth in 1968, that was helping that. We could probably still use it. In 1970, it was changed to Accent on Youth because they felt they needed a more positive direction. So I served as an Accent on Youth program manager. That was my first position on the state level, was under that area. And then today, we know it as Youth of Today. So it has still continued. It is still part of what we do, a big part. That's in most of the chapters, I'd say that's one of the more active areas, is doing different things like that. Outstanding Young Adult falls under that area. And this has been around forever. And this, I think, was probably about Roxanne's year. I think I got this picture.
Yeah, I think.
So that would have been in the 70s.
78, 79.
So the end, and then last year's. So we still have that program. It is still one that they started, and we are continuing, and hopefully will continue to do that. Another programming area that was long-term for the organization was, it actually started out age-retarded citizens, which today would not be the terminology people would want to use, which eventually then went to people with developmental challenges, and now falls under Community Connections, correct?
Yes, but the organization that we worked with was called Minnesota Retired Citizens.
That was ARC.
ARC, yep.
And I'm wondering if they have changed their name.
Yes, they
I think
have.
they have.
Yep. They were reluctant to change it at first because I remember talking with Ed from Camp Friendship that they were reluctant because it was so long known, you know.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a problem with it, but it was more the general public. But through that project, we worked with Camp Friendship a lot. Some of you may have been up to the camp. It's near Annandale. It was actually bought from a resort and converted to the camp. And the Jaycees were actually involved in that at that time when they purchased that property to convert it to a camp. So we came along and decided that we wanted something that would identify us, and we set out on a project to to build what we call the boathouse. It's really more like a lakeshore property, and that's not this. This is just a picture from the camp from 1969. And the project that they chose was these candles called Flame of Hope. So they worked very hard for several years, and they finally completed the boathouse. So this actually shows the boathouse here. This has been the current signage that is on that. So in 1972, when they finished all the fundraising for the boathouse, they invited Hubert Humphrey to come and help with the dedication. I don't know if you realize Hubert Humphrey had a child who was developmentally delayed, and so was always very committed to that area and program. So he was invited to be part of the dedication program. This is, can't see your face, she's probably happy that you can. President Chris Arone. She was state president at that time. And so they were going to put the plaque on the wall, and she said to Hubert Humphrey, "Do you want the first screw?" One of my favorite, and Chris tells it great. She tells that story every time, you know, so it's always a good laugh, a good story. And he being the good sport, and I think this was after she had said that, he laughed along with her. So that boathouse has, in '95, we had done some fundraising to do some painting, remodeling, fixing it up a little bit. This group that were at the deck, these are all past program managers that worked with that programming area that were present for the dedication. So another area we had worked with for many, many years, in fact, it was in the 50s they actually started working with March of Dimes. And at that time, it was when polio was rampant. And they asked us if we would help with the fundraising, getting information out about the need to get children vaccinated. So that was how we started with March of Dimes, and then of course it has continued through that. In the last, they've kind of changed their emphasis, and now they're really focusing on prematurity and what that causes with children. So, but Walk America was a big project for us for many, many, many years. So we would do Walk America, and yes, this is the Anoka chapter over the years doing
And the
Walk
Mother's
America.
March.
And the Mother's March. Yeah, they've changed the name now to that, but it was a long time project. Now it falls under our women's wellness programming rather than having its own. But when we changed to Women of Today, the March of Dimes Foundation is one of the biggest supporters of us. They wrote letters supporting us in our decision and hung in there with us, and so we were really grateful to them and for their support of how they...
And weren't they nationally? Didn't we bring them nationally? Weren't they involved nationally? I thought Marcia Angie was involved
Yes,
with that.
when we were, it was
When we were
Jaycees.
Jaycees.
Yep. National. So a couple of other former programming areas. We worked with the Kidney Foundation for a long time. That was also one of our very early programming areas, and cystic fibrosis. And we worked with them, and that was a big one for us. Wonderful support from them too, and support when we changed over. Also, a big program or project we would do was a bowl-a-thon. And the first year of the bowl-a-thon, we raised in a one-day bowl-a-thon $151,000. Wow. So it was, we probably, I think I had seen that over the years of working with cystic fibrosis, we raised $1 million.
Right.
Wow.
So we were part of their efforts to find the gene and locate the gene for determining cystic fibrosis.
Do you remember Paul Majors, the
Yeah.
TV? Yeah, he's not here anymore. But we used to get to go. I was state president and got to go. I don't know if you got to go. Yeah, with the project manager and him, fly around to the
I didn't get to
different
fly,
bulletins.
though.
We flew to the different bulletins. It was very cool, and a lot of money that we made. I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, those days,
Wow.
it was a lot of money.
Yep, that was
It's a really good project. Fun, easy to run, actually. And
Yeah, one-day project.
Yeah.
So other, we have the priority area, which now is wishes and more, and so it started out every 2 years, and we had 2 areas, then we narrowed it down to 1 area that we now do 3 years, and it gives us a little bit more time to do an impact in that. So just a few, this is just a few, because of course if you think back, 1975 was the first time we started a priority project, and SIDS, which is Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, was our first one. It was a very successful program that people really went and supported that area. So these are just a couple of the ones over the years that we had done. So that's kind of our service of what we have done over the years, and as you can see, a lot of that has continued on. So in the area of growth, I just wanted to show you a few things that we still do that we had done for growth. And of course, the President's State Delegate Retreat is one of those. And in the early years, we held it out at Camp Friendship. So these pictures are out, these 3, well, they're all from out at Camp Friendship when we held it out there. And it's continued to be a good training program. We've revised it a little bit with a one-day event and different things, but it still does that growth that those presidents and give them that assistance that they need. So that leadership continues. This is just a few of showing how our leadership has continued. And here's the installation and passing of the gavel. This is what they were doing here. There's the gavel. So passing that gavel, the very ceremony that we still do in the organization. So part of that is...
The past presidents used to come to our meetings and they'd say, a lot has changed, but a lot is the same. They would listen to, the discussion and the votes, and they would always say, and, these are some that, early on, and they'd say, it's interesting that we have just continued to do a lot of really good things. And what we worry about is often the same things that our founders worried about.
For those of you who were at the Key Women meeting last night, I brought up the fact, this is Priscilla Nauer, and she passed away in December of this past year, and we just had voted a donation in her memory. But she was one of the biggest past president supporters of our organization, served on the foundation board, many, many, many years. She was president in the 60s. I think it was 63, around
She's
in
from
that.
South St. Paul.
She was just a wonderful, fun individual. Executive Council hasn't really changed. Well, maybe it's changed a little bit. A little sober in those first years. Not quite so sober now. But it's still the same purpose. It's the meeting of the leadership to get things worked out, representing their chapters at that meeting. State committees. Still meeting with state committees. This was a state committee, and again, this is Priscilla Nauer. You can tell she shared a lot of pictures with me, so in her day. And state committee meetings now. Now, how many times at our state committee meetings do we see the nylons and the So something's changed. This one just cracked me up, though. This is an ad put in the newsletter in 1976, and this shows that something hasn't changed. If sharp, dedicated young woman needed to assume the responsibility of state treasurer of the Mrs. Jaycees of Minnesota. How many years are we searching for that state treasurer when it comes election time? All the past presidents can go, yeah, that's... So they were still looking for that person. No salary, but fantastic fringe benefits. So, state program managers. Early on, it was called a state program coordinator in that early days. And when I held a position like that, that's what we were. It was program coordinators. A little longer name, and then we switched to program managers. But these are just showing some of the, not very many, but we have a lot of people who have served as program managers for us. Conventions. They Some different, some the same. The voting assembly called. We never recall using that terminology. But here's a couple of more current pictures. This picture is the convention when the Jaycees were running the national convention. This is Lois Christensen and her husband, William Christensen, going because they were hosting that convention. So that's just to show you a convention in Minnesota that they held. Just a few more convention pictures to show kind of and as you know, it doesn't look much different than some of the things we did. Wardrobe maybe a little bit different, but still smiles on their faces, people having fun, all together, learning different things. This picture actually was taken when Minnesota was #1. And Roxanne Daggett was the state president at the national convention when Minnesota was recognized as the #1. In those days, Minnesota was the largest women's auxiliary to the Jaycees. At that time, we were the largest in the nation. For many years, we were the largest in that.
You would go to meetings, and the other states would have hardly anything to manage, and they'd find out what you made. And you try not to say too much because you just tried not to make it seem like you were bragging, because you really weren't. You wanted as much help as they did, but they just couldn't get over. The other presidents couldn't get over, and the national presidents couldn't get over what we did. We did lots more than the national presidents did.
And
that's probably still true.
Yes, it's probably very still true. When we switched over to Women of Today, we were still the largest of that group. So another growth thing that we have in our organization was in 1972 we started having forums at Fall State Convention. It was the first time. And this program just lists the areas that they have the forums on. This is a listing of forums. I think it was from like 2013. So similar type thing. We had domestic violence, March of Dimes, success, prevent child abuse Minnesota, which was our priority program area at that time. Isaac's Journey, which would go on to become a priority area for us. The newslet and public relations, and this is a membership one. So same type of forums you'll see on our schedule these days. This is another program that goes way, way back. Spoke at Sparkette, and it became the STEP program. And we had kind of an issue when we changed because the U.S. organization had been called JCS. And we never liked that terminology because an S is something smaller. So we were really happy to change from Spoke at Sparkette to STEP when we became Women of Today, because we did not consider ourselves less than what the Jaycees were, but there had been comments and talk of that. So, Key Women Awards. This is the first Key Women Award to Lois Fuller in the 70s. I can't remember.
Has to have been.
Yeah, and this was our last, more recent Key Women Award. So it is an award that is
What's
still.
Diane Bennett? So it's Diane Bennett, so she had to have been 70, maybe 72, 73.
Yeah, in the 70s somewhere. I should have checked that one out.
Diane was from Brooklyn 7, Brooklyn Park.
Yeah, and she passed away
This last year,
too. She was at the last anniversary celebration. So in 1977, we changed our name from Mrs. Jaycees to Jaycee Women. And there was a lot going on in the culture and in our organization culture. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you want me to?
You want to start?
Yeah. So we were Mrs. Jaycees, and when we first started back in the 50s, in order to join and be part of the auxiliary, you had to be married to a JC. You could not be a member. And then we, even if you got divorced, or if your spouse died, you had to quit the organization.
Wow.
Now, this was even before I was a member.
I was at my first state meeting. I think it was my first state meeting in 73 or 74, and they were having this discussion, and people were very serious about what that might mean for our organization if we allowed people who weren't married, or even if they were divorced. And I'm like, really? This is an issue? I mean, I'm like running around. I mean, already they got me kind of moving, because it was like, come on, if they want to be a part of things, why shouldn't they be able to? Maybe their husband doesn't want to. But people were really worried about that it would change, kind of that we would no longer be as much service to the Jaycees. Well, we had already not been as much service. I mean, we already had so much of our own. But I think they were worried about that piece, you know, that we wouldn't be co-chapters. I mean, you know, my chapter, my husband and I happened to be presidents the same years, but you had your banquet, end of the year banquet together. You didn't have them separate. I mean, you just did a lot of stuff together. You went to, our chapter was smart because they named both of us state delegates the very first year we joined to get us to go. They, you know, they thought if he was going to do it, I might as well go. And so they were smart because they got people active, and they got, if they got a guy, they got a gal. You know, I mean, it worked for them in a lot of ways. It wasn't a bad thing, but there were a lot of people that weren't.
It was more the culture of that time, of what you did things together in the organization. And, you know, so yes, we had changed a lot. And I really give credit a lot to the Minnesota Jaycees.
Yes.
Because they did not want to have women join their organization. So what they did is they made us stronger, so that they could just say, well, why do you want to join us when you can join this group?
Right.
And so consequently, we learned a lot from them. A lot of our programming things started, personal enrichment courses, the impromptus, the speak up, all that type of thing came from the Jaycees. And they taught us. They were our teachers on how we should do it, how to run an organization. But probably the biggest gift those Jaycees gave us is they allowed us to incorporate as a separate organization in the state of Minnesota.
Smartest thing ever.
So in a minute I'll talk about when that transition happened, we were able to just separate as an organization because they had given us the legality to say, you can't take our money, we had to give up some programming because it was their name or programs they started, but they gave us that ability to stand on our own 2 feet. It was almost, I hate to say this, but it was like a divorce at that time when it happened. And we will get into a little bit more on that. But right a few years before that, in '77, we changed the name to Jaycee Women. And it was a fight. I had just joined in '75, so when I came on board, I'm like, what's this all about? You know, I don't understand this. And then you learned, and we had, by that time, started extending chapters in communities that did not have a Jaycee chapter.
Right.
So, of course, the whole chapter were not married to a Jaycee. There weren't any there, that type. And we had begun as an organization recruiting women who just wanted to be part of a service organization. So we had a lot of members joining at that point. And so the name change made sense for us as to represent who we were. So Roxanne Daggett was the first president to be a Jaycee Women president at that time. So there was a lot of PR, a lot of, you know, getting our name out as, yes, we're the same organization, who we are, that type of thing. So.
But national didn't become, are you going to talk about that?
Yeah. So we weren't, so from '77 till 84 is when it kind of started, but 85 is when we then switched, was when we were Jaycee Women. And then it's kind of like everything fell apart. As you recall, the Supreme Court ruled that the Jaycees had to allow women in their organization. Now, I really don't have an issue with that. They should. We should all be allowed. And in fact, in Minnesota, they had been a test state to see how that would work. So my chapter in Anoka was chosen as one of those chapters that they could allow women to be in the Jaycees. So I was actually a Jaycee and a Jaycee Women at the same time. But when it came time to make that decision, I knew which organization I wanted to go to. If I stayed in the Jaycees, the most I could have done is be secretary. If I wanted to do more, develop more, have more opportunities, Jaycee Women was going to offer that to me. So again, the culture in our country, in our world was still, you know, I mean, some of it's still there today, but, you know, at that point it was really quite evident. So after the Supreme Court ruling that they had to allow women, they were basically told, the local organizations, they had a meeting in Tulsa, and there were about 5 or so of us that went with the Jaycees to have that vote on whether or not they were going to disband the women's organization, which it had been the U.S. JCS, and then had just changed in '83 to U.S. JC Women. So they had just made that name change themselves on the national level. And so we went with some of the Minnesota members who supported us, who wanted to see us continue as an organization, went to Tulsa for the vote on whether or not to disband. And unfortunately, it was not a really good business, and the vote passed that they were going to disband the organization. So
There had been stuff going on, though, for a
Yeah.
couple of years. There had been things happening, and we kind of knew it was coming down the road. It just was going to be up to that vote. I think that's really important to know. And some of it is very political, and some of it is very numbers. You know, they could get a lot of our members to join them, and you know, they have the same issues that we do with gaining members, and they wanted our members. They truly thought they were going to
Yeah.
So we worked pretty hard on.
it was one of the, as you mentioned, some things started ahead of time. When I was state president,
Yes.
the ruling came down that you had to have a JC chapter in order to
Right.
have a JC Woman chapter in your community. It was a nightmare, a
Wow.
total nightmare. I spent my year helping the Jaycees to extend chapters throughout the state of Minnesota to save our chapters, to go visit these chapters. It was awful to tell them, I'm sorry, you can't be a chapter. You can't be a member because you don't have a JC chapter. So our chapters were extending JC chapters in their communities so that our chapters could stay. We had another thing called affiliation, and we could apply to the Jaycees so say you didn't have a chapter, and I'm going to pick on Medelia. They were one of them. They did not have a JC chapter in their community. So then the Jaycees, state president, would have to write a letter to the national organization saying, and there's no opportunity for a JC chapter in this community. We have tried, we've done all these efforts, so there's not going to be one. So therefore, I would have to write and ask permission. So I think it was New Ulm that we might have affiliated with. I'm not sure. I think it was. I had to go to another community that did not have a Women of Today chapter and say they're not going to get one. We want to affiliate Medelia with the New Ulm Jaycees. And the state president both of us had to write letters to the national organization and get permission to do this. So we did this throughout the state. Looking back then later,
We
as
probably
things
didn't
went on,
legally have to do that. We probably
Well,
didn't have to legally do that because we were.
we were an organization. We were legal separately, you know. So, but in order to use the name and that program,
Right,
then we
JC,
had, because we were
yeah.
considered an auxiliary.
Right.
I had to have every chapter in the state sign an affiliation form. Have the
That
JC
was a
sign
nice
it saying, this group of women have permission to have a women's auxiliary, and they are affiliated with us in the community of such and such and such. That was a big issue, a very big issue. When the national president came to visit our I was scared to death. I was so worried she was going to be attacked. They were not happy, and they had every right not to be happy.
And this was in the 80s?
This was 1982.
Well, even my year, 80, 81, I thought our organization, I was going to secede from the U.S. because I don't even remember what that whole thing was, but I know I had to have.
It was the start of
It was
this.
the start of it. I know I had to have the chapters that wanted to do something come and work with the parliamentarian to get something decent across so that we weren't disaffiliating. I thought, oh, this will be great. I'll go to my next national meeting and, okay, we're not a member of you anymore. Because our members were up in arms. They did not think this was right. I mean, not in a bad way, but in a, hey, we're here and we've been working and give us the credit kind of thing. It was starting.
It was starting, and looking later, when we started the whole process of the vote, we looked back and thought, you know, did they know this was coming down the road? Yes, I think they did. I think, but this was already a fight in the courts. It was already being fought, and that they knew that they were going to lose that fight, and that they could then sign women. What better way than to sign an organization of 5,000 women to their organization? Think of the points they would gain by we almost doubling their size of the organization if they did that. So that's kind of what we felt. Not real sure, but then there's no need to really. So everyone's a little unhappy. What should we do? Everybody just kept saying, well, we want to stay, we want to stay. Well, that wasn't an option. They were disbanding us. We could not do it. So in Minnesota, we had 3 options that we could do. The first one was to stay Jaycee women, which, as I just mentioned, really was not an option. The second was to merge with the Jaycees, which is what they were hoping. And the third option was to disaffiliate from the Jaycees and start our own organization, which in the long run is what we did.
Amen to that.
Well, we had a number of meetings, so I want you to know that even though most of us that worked on this have pretty strong feelings that we probably should disaffiliate and start our own, I mean, we kind of knew that. We really tried to be fair and open, and I think kind of we really worked hard to be really fair. You know how I think women tend to be, we always want things to be fair. And in retrospect, I think we were pretty nice. But we'd have meetings with the Jaycees, and one of them, I'll never forget, well, one of them was at my house, and that was not as bad, because one of the husbands of one of our good members was probably going to be a state president, and he was there, and I think was a much better spokesman for understanding our organization. But at one of the meetings, he said, well, what are you going to offer us? We have lots of programming, we have all these members, we have leaders who want to go on and be state president or be, a program manager or whatever. And this one fella, and I know who it is, I'm not going to say, but he said, we offer you Jaycees. That's it.
And we said, well, would you recognize our past state presidents?
No.
No, we're giving you Jaycees.
Wow.
And
So,
to be honest, that was the end.
That was the end.
That
for
was
me.
the end.
It was like we were trying to be really nice, but no more. But we still stayed nice on paper for our members, I have to tell you. I mean, I think we did. I think we were really, really diplomatic. Our members clearly voted, though,
Oh, yes.
to join to stay, or to start our own. There were members who did not, and their chapters stayed, and they went and became, Jaycees. That was their decision. I mean, clearly their decision, and that's what they did. But it was an interesting time, a very sad time. Well, at the national, you're going to go into that, or is that coming later? Or you want me to say about the national meeting where we had to vote, or am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, just jump ahead. I just want to tell them a little about the process of what we did. Since the committee then finally, after many meetings, recommended that we go with the disaffiliating, the third choice. So then, and Barb Fish was state president. Can you imagine coming into your presidency not knowing this was going to happen? It happens in July, she's installed in May. It was horrendous, but she was the best leader in that position for us at that time.
She had a very strong husband who had been
a very big Jaycee. That was very, and he has suffered a lot because of that decision to stand by us being,
He supported his way.
He did very much so.
He supported all of us.
He supported all of us. So we came back, okay, what are we going to do? So we basically had a steering committee that worked many hours trying to figure out the best route to go, and we put out, if we're going to have a vote, that in March we would take a vote as to what the chapters wanted to do. So each chapter had a vote to say what their decision was of what they wanted.
A written vote.
A written vote. We did not conduct the vote. To make that vote fair, we had a husband of a CPA that took over the whole process. His firm handled the vote. All the votes had to go into him, and they tallied everything. And overwhelmingly, it was voted to disaffiliate from the Jaycees. A victory, but a sad victory. I really have to say I'm sad because I benefited by being state president under the Jaycee organization. I learned a lot. It was a very privilege. We had 3 of our 4 state conventions were held with the Jaycees, and so I can't say enough good about what I learned. But the political atmosphere at that time was real detrimental to us and to women. So, that's the way the route things went. Then, of course, we had to vote on a name, and so names were submitted, same type of thing. And Jaycee Women was the name that was
Women of Today.
Women of Today. And behind times, yeah.
Well, but we went to national, where the national women then, at national meeting in Indianapolis, and you're going to talk about some of that, right? They voted to to disband our organization. And I will never forget that day in my mind, because there we are in this room full of women that we thought were powerful and strong. They're all crying.
This is the second, yeah.
They're all crying, and I'm like, you ladies, you don't have to be crying. You can just move on into your own organization. I remember just being flabbergasted that they didn't understand their power, their own personal power as women and as human beings to continue doing what they wanted to do. They didn't have to just sit there. It was like we walked out and I just thought, I can't believe it. However, the next day, there were quite a few of members of the other states who came and met with us when we formed, you're going to talk more about them, when we formed the new national organization as well as our organization. And they were strong women who knew their power, who understood, but many of them just hold it. Now, some of that was political, believe me. There was politics in those organizations that go way back. And it was interesting how much that was kind of driven by some of that. Even who was president when that happened, I think, was very political, because they knew she would just fold. I'm sorry, huh?
Just go for what they said, yep.
Yep, she would, because the woman that we had worked for from Wisconsin was really a strong woman who would have, I think, represented us much better and helped the other states become a new organization. I think she really would have done that if she had been able to be there, but not Doris.
I see Smokey was around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that in that picture. Isn't that funny?
Isn't that funny?
So the vote was taken. It was very sad, but we were feeling really good because we were leaving that meeting and going to this meeting. And we met in a different hotel in the basement, and we let word out that Minnesota, they all knew Minnesota we had already voted to become Women of Today in annual convention. We knew that. But that they could come to our meeting and hear what we were doing and what they could do and what we could do as a national organization. And the national conventions were a very interesting thing. I have big education going to those because it very much was like a national Democratic or Republican convention. I learned about backdoor politics and the hacks that would be getting votes. I mean, it was, like I said, I learned a lot from the Jaycees, but that was very interesting. So we went to the basement and met. This is a picture.
It was a good basement.
It was a very,
packed basement.
very exciting day. And Barb Fish ran the meeting, and Dawn Young from the Fridley chapter. Those two were the two chairs of the organization. Dawn worked as treasurer with her, and so we told the others how they could do this and how they could work with us. So that was the beginning for the U.S. Women of Today, and it was a beginning for us. And that was the first. So we started, helped them, and on July 4th of 1985, we met at the state capitol in Minnesota and celebrated a good press release from our beginnings as Women of Today. So legally, that was our start. In Minnesota, as I said, we had actually done from May 1st on. And as Mary Kay mentioned, the chapters had a choice. They could stay with us. Our membership at the time the vote was taken was over 5,000. But by the time it was kind of all said and done, we were down to probably 3,000, and then that next year, some more we lost. Because chapters were choosing to become Jaycees or to just become a community organization. So that was a lot of where those members went that did not stay with us. But this was a celebration of that. Barb was there as the national chair. She wasn't called president. She didn't want to be called president. She didn't want that terminology. So she was the founding chair of the United States Women of Today, and that was her title.
And it's Sue Schuler.
Sue Schuler was the first state president then from Minnesota Women of Today. So that was the day we let the balloons off, which now we probably wouldn't do because birds. But so good. That was probably our philosophy that we needed during those days. Keep calm and join Women of Today. It was an interesting time. Okay?
I was a member in Buffalo and a lot of which I joined just before your year ended.
I wondered, yeah.
And we had a lot of women that, if you're really torn if you're going to stay or they quit. We were so used to doing all of our projects and everything together, and the ones that were not a project together, we made sure that as JC women, we didn't do something on the Jaycees night, and
Right.
the Jaycees didn't do something on the JC women's night, because we all had kids at home to watch.
Right, right.
You know, and some of them, they said they just couldn't belong to something their husband wasn't a member of too, and you know, it was almost like a divorce for some.
For some.
It was such a hard time.
And some chapters continue to work very well
Yes,
together,
yes.
very well.
We
It
do.
wasn't meant to have us not be
Right.
helping or working together, but it was like our survival.
Mhm.
Because they didn't want our programs, they didn't want our leaders, they didn't want all those things that we had done.
Mhm.
So it was very sad, it was hard.
Mhm.
It was, I would say locally, those sentiments were not there. The JC, the men's organization, many
Yeah,
of them
they were.
supported us. They supported
Right.
our decision.
All of
They
them.
were good.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was support there. It was higher up,
Yeah.
where they wanted those numbers.
It was all about numbers.
It was totally all about.
5,000 members, just think about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. A lot of
Those
people.
awards you're gonna get.
I remember that.
So, since, we've continued on, we're doing a lot of things together, but through the years, we've had many anniversaries, and we have one coming up. So these are just a few snapshots from over the years. Of course, this one was really a little earlier on, and a few of us look a lot younger in their picture. A little thinner too, that type of thing. But over the years, this was the last one that was the 65 years, and this one, Jen, that was your year, was the 60th, was that year. So just a few, we've got a lot of other pictures, and hopefully some of these women will be able to join us. Some of them are sadly no longer with us, but it's a wonderful group. I can't say enough about the kinship that you feel when you have served in that type of a position with those people who have done the same thing. They understand what you're doing, how you're struggling with the time commitments, job commitments, and giving to an organization. They've all given and given and given, and there's a kinship that they're all very, very special people.
One thing we didn't talk about with the reforming is we had to rewrite everything.
Oh, yes.
There was a total, I wouldn't want to discount that. All the individual development programs, I helped write some, other people helped write some. All the names of everything had to be redone so that we were, correct and not using any JC things, even though, you'd learned a lot from them. But that was a lot of work for those women during those years, and, I wouldn't want to discount that. But it was kind of cool, on the other hand, is then we could develop our own things that worked for us and that we wanted. So, it was a lot of work, though,
Yeah.
I think, redoing everything.
One
like
other
that.
thing I had failed to mention was we had an attorney we worked with.
Mhm.
Would never have happened if we hadn't had him.
He
And
was wonderful.
his wife had been a member of the organization, and he volunteered pro bono to do all of our legal work.
Wow.
Everything. And the best part, he had an office in the idea still did. And I remember going down there to meet with him, and I'd put on a suit and I remember one day walking in and going to the elevator and looking around thinking, oh, I'm just like all these other people at the IVF center, going up to the attorney's office. But he was so good. He was so great. We had one incident where the Jaycees mailed out a letter to our members, and he immediately sent them a letter saying because they had gotten a hold of our membership list, and he said, you have no right. You have no these names. Yes, cease and desist. So
Yeah, he was fabulous. He
was
was
great.
really, he got us through a lot. And legally, we were lucky that we had, that right to our own organization, even though I think we still could have done it, but it was a lot simpler.
that's what the other states did not have. None of them. We were the only state that was incorporated as a separate organization. The rest were auxiliaries. And when you're an auxiliary, you are under that other.
But you can
so-
form a new organization.
Right,
It's
but
a
then you
little
can't
more
take
work.
it. Like I said, we could take all our money with us, we could take our, things they could not. So.
It
so-
was hard for them.
So there's a lot of things that, as I mentioned, you know, we've talked about the service, we've talked about the growth, the leadership in the organization. Some things are still, as I mentioned, part of our organization. Membership, of course, it's the main thing that we need to keep us going. So just a few, I'm just going to go through quickly some of the pictures that were over the years from different membership people. Had the Pillsbury Doughboy one year, we blew bubbles one year. I mean, making it fun, lots of fun.
You know, and we didn't used to have a Katie or a Nancy. We didn't have that. Did you know that? Until it was my year as president that we decided that we were big enough. All of our members, I mean, our officers did the work that they ended up doing, and kind of like running a business. I mean, we were doing that, what you're paying for now. It was pretty controversial, we thought. It was not everybody liked the idea, but we took that leap, and our first office was at the Jaycees Chapter Service Center with Pearlie Christensen, and then Donna Urick, and then you? No.
No, I took over after we moved out in the middle of the night.
Well, we moved out.
Literally, we did. We
We
took
did
the
have to
van,
move out.
went there after hours in the dark and packed everything up and moved out. And it was moved to my house.